So what are my predictions for the Australian Grand Prix? With the third race of the year soon to be upon us, I thought I'd go through who I think is going to do well and who I think won't be doing so well, as we head to Australia and Albert Park in Melbourne for the third race of the year. Now, instead of just running through my 20th to first place drivers, I thought I'd change it up a little bit and go through a number of different categories, if you like, for my predictions for the weekend. Effectively a combination of which drivers I think will be doing well and which drivers I think won't be doing so well. Besides Lance Stroll, that is, that's pretty much a given. Plus, if anyone's wondering, yes, we are still keeping hold of Enzo's predictions. They'll just be sort of towards the end of the video in their own little segment, so make sure you stick around for that, along with my eventual complete list of 20th to first place. But with that out of the way, let's get into my predictions for the 2024 Australian Grand Prix. Starting off with the qualifying GOAT then for the 2024 Australian Grand Prix. Please do feel free to give me some suggestions for a better name down in the comments, it's all I could come up with. But for this one, it's going to be Lando Norris. Lando's well known for his good qualifying pace, however so far this year hasn't really shown it. I feel like third race of the year he'll be settled into the season and could really drop a performance in qualifying that makes us go wow. Next up then, we have the qualifying fail, and for this one we're headed to Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton. The start of his season really hasn't been that great, I think summed up by the fact he only has 2 more points than Oliver Behrman, who stepped in at the last minute for Sainz last time out in Saudi Arabia. Qualifying for Lewis has in general sort of been trending downhill, and this year especially hasn't been great. He did almost get knocked out in Q2 by Ollie Behrman. Seems weird to put the driver with most pole positions ever in the history of the sport into qualifying fail, but ultimately that's just where he and the pace of that Mercedes is right now. Next up, we move into the sneaky good category, and for this one I've gone with someone a little bit further down the pack, and Zhou Guanyu. The Chinese driver had a great race first time out in Bahrain, slightly less amazing for the second race than in Saudi Arabia, but still he's someone who generally I think has started the year well, and while in an Alfa Romeo it's going to be tricky to put in what is an obviously top tier performance, I still think that the way Zhou's performing is going to get him in this sneaky good category. Then into sneaky bad, and we're going to stick with that Alfa Romeo theme.
One time is funny, 2 times it's fucking annoying, no?
And Valtteri Bottas. I'm not sure at what point a disappointing Bottas performance is no longer sneaky bad and just generally bad, as the start of his season hasn't really been that great, and honestly he's been incredibly disappointing. However, with regards to where we would expect Valtteri to be, I just feel like Australia just isn't going to deliver for him, especially considering that Zhou's doing well, and compared to his teammate, he's probably going to slot down the order just a little bit. Next on to the big guns then, and we first off have the driver of the day. It's quite a tricky one here. Now obvious picks could be Max Verstappen, because let's be honest, he's probably winning this race by 30 seconds. But the person I've gone for is Oscar Piastri. The Australian in his second season, back at his home race, and he's generally started this year well. He's really looked like he's settled into that McLaren car, coming off a great race last time out in Saudi Arabia, and I could really expect him to carry that momentum forward. Plus, who doesn't like a good local boy story? Then the last of the individual picks, and it's the flop of the day, and this time it's also going to an Australian and Daniel Ricciardo. Coming into this year, people were expecting Ricciardo to be wiping the floor with Yuki, impressing everyone and making a play for that Red Bull seat. However, 2024 just hasn't really looked like it. 2 bad races to start off the year, and honestly, Ricciardo's never really done well in Australia. Combine all those things together, and I do think it could be a bit of a flop of a weekend for Daniel. And then finally, for my predictions, we're getting into the podium. No surprises here, there are 2 Red Bulls out of the 3, but the question is where will they be? And it's a 1-2. With Charles Leclerc slotting into 3rd place in that Ferrari, as ultimately, Ferrari do look like the second quickest car, and with Sainz potentially coming off of his surgery, or it being Ollie Behrman, I can't see either of those 2 beating Leclerc in this one. Getting into the top 2, and which of the Red Bull drivers could it be in first? It's obviously Max Verstappen, leaving Sergio Perez in second, giving us a Verstappen-Perez-Leclerc podium for 2 races in a row. Now, as most of you guys know, this channel isn't necessarily just a one-person show. We do have this little guy over here who's currently on the sofa, who each week makes his predictions for the race. Now, last time out in Saudi Arabia, he actually did incredibly well, scoring 18 points versus my 17, 3 points for a correct prediction, 2 for 1 place off and 1 place away. And that 18 to 17 score does mean that yes, I was beaten by a dog. That win for him in our battle in Saudi Arabia also means that on the season it's now 1-1, meaning that these predictions in Australia are for who takes the lead. Going through Enzo's predictions for Saudi Arabia, and we have Logan Sargent in last place, Fernando Alonso a third prediction outside the top 10, Yuki Tsunoda in 18th with Valtteri Bottas in 17th, Pierre Gasly for Alpine in 16th with Daniel Ricciardo apparently doing pretty well up in 15th, Esteban Ocon helping fly the flag for Alpine in 14th, Zhou Guanyu 13th, Magnussen 12th, and Lance Stroll just outside the top 10 in 11th. Moving into Enzo's top 10, and we start off with one of the Mercedes drivers, as his first person picked is Lewis Hamilton. His pretty disappointing start to the season is seemingly continuing. Up then in 9th, and we go to someone who would be doing incredibly well to finish here, as it's Nico Hülkenberg in the Haas. 1 point out in Saudi Arabia, and apparently he's going one better this time. Above him in 8th, and it's someone who's done incredibly well in recent years in Australia, as it's Alex Albon in the Williams predicted in 8th place. A couple of points would be nice for Williams to get on the board, and out of their 2 drivers, it would definitely be Albon the one to do it. 7th place now, and it's time for McLaren, as he goes for Lando Norris. To be fair, based on their positions this year and their finishes recently, Lando Norris below Piastri might not be too unrealistic. Then in 6th, it's the first Ferrari driver being picked, and it's Carlos Sainz. At the time of recording, I'm not quite sure whether or not it'll be Sainz or Behrman in the car, and so whichever one is in is going to get this slot, as I think that's probably the fair enough way to do it. Moving into the top 5, and it's an Australian in 5th place, as it's Oscar Piastri. Previously, Enzo predicted Oscar to finish outside the top 10 in both races 1 and 2. However, he seems to finally realise that Piastri is actually fairly decent, and for Australia in his home race is giving him a 5th place finish, which is pretty good. Into 4th then, and with just Russell, Perez, Leclerc and Verstappen to go, it appears that Enzo's going for the Mercedes. Realistically, that Mercedes car just doesn't quite have the pace that they'd like to have, and so putting George Russell in 4th out of those remaining drivers is probably a pretty realistic selection for Enzo. That of course means that Enzo and I both have the same top 3, but will it be the same order? Apparently not, as this time after some deliberation, Enzo's going with Sergio Perez over Charles Leclerc. To be fair, if a few things go Charles' way and maybe the Ferrari is slightly closer to the Red Bulls, I could see him picking off Perez. And to be fair, I think from a fan perspective, we'd all appreciate that as well. So with just Leclerc and Verstappen remaining, if you're a normal human being that watches Formula 1, it's a pretty obvious pick. And apparently Enzo now is a normal human being that watches Formula 1, as his second place driver is Charles Leclerc. I think for me, Charles is a pretty clear third in terms of the overall combined driver-car pace at the moment, and so having him in this top 3 for Enzo is pretty realistic. Having him beating Perez, well, that's another question. That of course means that in first place there's only one driver left, and for the first time this year, Enzo's predicting a Verstappen win. I think he's finally cottoned on to the fact that putting Verstappen in P1 is a guaranteed 3 points for the predictions. So there you have all of my predictions along with Enzo's predictions for the Australian Grand Prix. 20th place up to 1st, and tune in next time to see how we've done. But anyways, that is all for now. I hope you have enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below about the new kind of format with these predictions videos. But until next time, take care.